Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshwari Mata ki jai. We'll go on with chapter 44 from the Devi Bhagavatm, retold by Ramesh, Menon. Janamajaya asked, Muni, how did Trishankur recover, or did he? Was he purified in the Ganga, or did Vashishta Muni withdraw his Vedavyasa said, peace stole over Trishanku beside the murmuring Ganga, for he worshipped the Devi Bhagavati unceasingly. Her precious name was always on his lips. Meanwhile, Vishvamitra returned to that forest after he completed an austere tapasya on the Himalayas. Indeed, Brahma had appeared before that kshatriya who had become a rishi and blessed him. When Vishvamitra saw how healthy and happy his wife and children were, he asked her, how did you feed the children during the famine? I was anxious because about you on the mountain. But I thought to myself, even if I did return, there was little I could do, since I have given away all my wealth. I could only be another mouth to feed, but I did not escape the famine on my way home. One night, I was so hungry that I crept into a Chandala's home to steal some food for myself. As I was about to eat some cooked dog's flesh that I saw in the Chandala's kitchen, I became aware that someone had come into the dwelling and was watching me. I almost dropped the dish in my hand in alarm, but the young man did not seem angry. Quite gently, he asked me, what are you doing here in this house? You look like a noble soul. Who are you? What do you want in a Chandala's kitchen? My voice quivering with hunger, I said to him, I am a sannyasin, young man. I have been starving for many days, and I have come looking for something to eat in your house. I beg you, let me eat this curried flesh in your cooking pot. I will die of hunger if I don't. But he said to me with annoyance in his voice, this is a Chandala's house. You belong to one of the higher varnas. You must never touch my food or you will be defiled. I was a little surprised at his concern. Moreover, he spoke in a chaste language, such as I had heard spoken in royal sabhas. But he had not finished his advice. A human birth is exceedingly hard to have in this world, and then to be born a Brahmana is harder still. You must not dream of taming yourself by eating dog's meat in a Chandala's house. We are the seventh caste, and Manu has declared us to be untouchables for our sins of our past lives. I replied, intelligent Chandala, what you say is true, yet it isn't the whole truth. For in times of danger and crisis, a man may have recourse to solutions that he is not allowed in ordinary times. The body must be maintained in health always. If a man must sin to achieve this, if there is no other way for him, that sin shall not adhere to him as long as he performs some tapasya for it. But if a man dies of hunger when he can eat even by stealing, that sin does cling to him. Chandala, if a man steals during a famine, his sin does not go to him, but to the god of rain, Indra himself, until he sends a monsoon to the parched lands. I spoke with conviction, and at that very moment, as if Indra had heard me, thunder and lightning exploded in the sky, and it began to pour, even like water gushing from a million elephants' trunks. I felt a deep joy and left the Chandala's house without eating the dog meat, for suddenly I was not hungry anymore. But tell me, how did you and the children survive this horrible famine? She said, when the famine began, I would go out into the forest to forage for wild rice, roots, and fruit. But as the days passed and there was no rain, I couldn't even find these anymore. The children were crying piteously, and I thought they would all die. So one day, when I could not bear to see them suffer, I decided I would sell our eldest boy to a rich man to be his servant and get some food in return. I tied a rope around his neck so he would not run away and let him out of the ashram. Our son realized what I meant to do and began to cry loudly. The prince Satyavrata, who had been banished to the forest by his father, King Aruna of Ayodhya, heard him. He accosted me and asked who I was and where I was taking the boy with the rope around his neck and why he was crying. When I told him, the noble prince said, "Take your son back to ashrama. I will bring you some meat to eat every day until the famine breaks or your husband comes home." Crying myself, I thanked him and went back home. The prince kept his word. Every day we would find some flesh meat tied to a tree outside the ashrama, venison, boar, and rabbit. The children and I had more than we needed to eat, and indeed the children grew healthy and strong. But one day Satyavrata could not find any game to hunt in the forest, and he went to Vasishtha's ashram and killed the Kamadhenu, his sacred cow. Vasishtha cursed him, first to be a Pishaka and to be called Trishanku. But Satyavrata worshipped the Devi, and she restored his human form. Aruna called his son home and made him king. But when Vasishtha cursed him again to be a Chandala, Trishanku is living in exile again in the forest, while his son Harishchandra rules Ayodhya. Satyavrata saved our lives, my lord. Now you must help him. Vishwamitra wanted to know why Vasishtha had cursed Trishanka a second time, and his wife told him about Satyavrata's obsession to rise into Devaloka in his human body. Vishwamitra realized the mission of helping Trishanku would not be an easy one, for that Kshatriya wanted heaven for himself, and his guru's curse was upon him. Vishwamitra, who also bore an old enmity for Vasishtha, went through the forest looking for Satyavrata of the unusual destiny. He found him living in a Chandala village, himself an ugly Chandala now. Why, he was the very man whose dog flesh the Muni had almost eaten. When Trishanku saw Vishwamitra, he fell at his feet and wept. Vishwamitra raised him up and blessed him. Then with tears in his eyes, he embraced Trishanka, who thanked him for what he had done for his wife and children. They sat together beside the murmurant Ganga, and slowly Vishwamitra drew his sad story from the Chandala, who had been a great king. He was deeply moved, for the rishi had been a king himself once called Kashika, but he had renounced his throne to seek Brahma-gyana, the eternal spirit. Now in Satyavrata, he saw another Kshatriya whose path through life was at least as extraordinary as his own. He felt compassion for Trishanku and swore he would help him. Since Satyavrata had saved his family's life once, Vishwamitra said he would use his punaya to help Trishanku realize his exceptional ambition. He would send him to Devaloka in his human body. Vishwamitra arranged to perform a yagya and invited all the rishis of the world to attend. He planned to have them bless the ritual and use their powers to make Trishanku's wish come true. But Vasishtha heard of the yagya and forbade the other munis to attend it. Seething in anger, Vishwamitra roared, "I will send you to Devaloka myself, Trishanku." He poured some holy water into his palm and recited the Gayatri mantra resonantly. He laid that hand on Trishanku's head and cried, "I, Kashika, give you all my punya. Rise, O Trishanku, rise into Devaloka in the Chandala's body." Like a bird, Trishanku rose into the air, crying out in exhilaration. He arrived at Indra's Amravati. But when Indra saw this dark Chandala flying towards him, he cried out in alarm, "Who is this flying towards me like a black comet?" Then he saw who it was and said, Trishanku, you are Chandala. How dare you try to enter Devaloka? Be gone, untouchable, back to the earth where you belong. Indra raised his hand, and like a bird shot with an arrow, Trishanku fell down toward the earth below. As he fell, he screamed, Vishvamitra, save me. Down in the world, the Muni heard him, and he raised his hand over his head and roared, Trishanku, stay where you are. And by Vishvamitra's tapasya shakti, Trishanku was suspended between heaven and earth, his eyes blazing. The Maharishi poured some more sacred water into his hand, performed Archmaniam, and began to create another Devaloka, a new heaven, around Trishanku. Indra saw this and cried in panic, "O Muni, what are you doing? Why are you so angry, great Kshika? There is no need for you to make another Devaloka. Just tell me what you want and you shall have it." Vishvamitra said in a voice like thunder, Trishanku is a pure soul, and he must have his heart's desire fulfilled. I mean to create another Swarga for him, and he shall be its Indra. Indra moaned, Muni, don't waste your punya. I will take Trishanku into Devaloka. I beg you, Kashika, desist. Vishvamitra said, if you take Trishanku into Devaloka. Indra flew down to the king with the Chandala's body, who hung between heaven and earth. With the touch of his palm, he gave Trishanku a Deva-lustrous body, and then he took him into Devaloka in a shimmering vimana, and made him a great lord of the realm of light. And Vishvamitra was satisfied. But the stars and galaxies he had already created for Trishanku remained where they were in the firmament, and Indra agreed that Satyavrata would be master of them, even as he, Indra, was of Amravati. But Vishvamitra's vast store of punya was exhausted by what he had done to help Trishanku, and he went again to the mountains to resume tapasya. In Ayodhya, Harishchandra heard about his father's salvation and was glad. He began to rule the kingdom with a lighter heart, and his was a golden reign. Time wore on, but Harishchandra's lovely queen, Saivya, did not conceive, and the throne of Ayodhya had no heir. The king performed countless sacrifices in his city, but to no avail. At last, in despair, Harishchandra took himself to the forest to his Kala guru, Vasishtha's ashram. He prostrated himself before that rishi and said, help me, Guru, for I have no sin, and my line will end with me. So said Vedavyasa to King Janamajaya. Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshwari Mata ki jai, Haryakandashwari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai.